Hello everyone, and welcome to your 63rd Cocoa programming tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to be diving into the fun, adventurous NSUndoManager. The NSUndoManager is also available on the iOS platform, so if you're here because you love iOS and you hate me for not doing iOS tutorials, then here's my hand outstretched to you to do a tutorial for iOS sort of as well. The cool thing about the NSUndoManager is it's actually not necessarily part of Cocoa, it's part of the Foundation framework, which means you could use it without a graphical user interface. And yeah, so what is the NSUndoManager? Well, the NSUndoManager essentially manages your undo and redo operations in your application. So that's pretty nifty because, people want to undo stuff. So yeah, that's that. I've already gone ahead and kind of pre-prepared this app because I don't want to spend the whole time just dinking around with some drawing and creation code, but I'll run through what I have here anyway. So I've created two subclasses of NSView. One is called Drawing View, one is called Circle View. And the idea of this application is we have a grid or a canvas that we're going to draw onto, and we're just basically going to add a bunch of circles and remove circles. That is the only capability that we're really adding in this tutorial, and we add them wherever we click down with the mouse. Alright, so what we're trying to do here is we have our, in this drawing view, we at the bottom have two overrides that I've done, and these allow us to work with a view-backed NS view basically. And the first property that I've overridden here is called once update layer, and we simply return true if we want the ability to update the layer directly. Normally the NSView manages the backing layer on its own and you shouldn't touch it, but by returning true with this, we basically say, hey, we're gonna F with it, and just be aware of that. Now the bottom function here that we've overridden is called update layer, and this one is going to, well, obviously, this is where we're going to update the layer. So here I'm updating the background color to be black color, and we get the CG color because that's what it wants. The circle view looks basically the same as that. We, again, just say we want to update layer. In the update layer, we are changing the background color to be white, and the corner radius is going to be width divided by 2, which basically means that it will look like a circle if the width and the height are the same. So that's why it's in the circle view. Alright, so the last thing that we're going to do here, just to demo and make sure that you're on the same page, we need to add a custom view to our window. And we need to do a few things. So the first thing we need to do is I'm going to make sure that this is going to stretch with the window, so I can add those 4 constraints there. Then I'm going to change the class to be our drawing view, like so. And lastly, I'm going to go to the View Effects Inspector, and I'm going to change this view right here, this top view on the core animation layer, to be checked, which means it's going to have a layer-backed view. Now, this view is the Windows content view, and because of that, that means that every subview of this content view will also have a core animated layer or a backing layer with it. So any subview of the Windows view will also be layer backed, and that's what we want because we've assumed that our drawing view and circle view are layer backed. We could also explicitly make this happen in the init, but I don't really want to go into that. So I've left it as it is and it'll work fine. And just to make sure that it is working fine, we can check this to make sure that this is all working out. And there we go. You should get a window and stretchable and has a black background. And the key part about this is if it doesn't show up to be black, you've probably just didn't enable this core animation layer on the window, and that's important. Alright, let's jump back into the drawing view code here, and what we want to do is we want the ability to add and remove the circle. So let's start off with adding the circle. I think this is the easiest. And what we're going to do is we're going to make 2 new functions for this. So these functions are very explicit in that they're only going to alter really they're trying to alter the model of the circle. Now if I was making a more complex application, imagine we maybe had Photoshop where I have a bunch of layers And these are all, managed in some kind of an array or some other data structure that would manage the contents of our, really the bulk of our applications document or something like that. Then I would want to alter, maybe change the array or something here. This function is really meant to change the state of this object. All right. And it's really not meant to do things that are representative of the view, even though, you'll just kind of see how we do this, but I'll explain why this is in a later part of the tutorial. So what we're doing in the add circle is quite simple. We're simply going to add it as a subview. So we'll say add subview circle. And sorry, I did not want to say circle.add subview. I just meant add subview. So that means self.add subview, right? That means that the circle will be added as a subview of our drawing view. Then I'm also going to call another method or create another method called remove circle. And again, it takes the same parameters, and this time we're going to say circle.remove from superview, like so. All right, so now with the add circle section, we simply want to create a new circle. And we can make a new circle view. And, Xcode just is not that great at auto-completing initializers, but I'm going to remember what I have to put in here. So we have ns_make_rect, and what I want to put in for this rect is the point that I've clicked, so point.x, point.y, and the width, we're going to arbitrarily make this circle with 30-30 width and height. Again, totally arbitrary, but it works. And then we want to add it. So we'll say add circle, circle. Now there's a few things with this that I'll point out. The point, you'll notice we take the events window location, or the location that it was clicked in the window. Then we convert that point to be represented in our coordinate space. So if this, drawing view is located somewhere else in the window, in this case it's basically the same as the Windows coordinates because it's matching the content frame or the content view. But if the drawing window was somewhere else, then we'd want to convert that point. And so this is always a good habit to do, is always convert the point of the location in the window from the view. If we pass a nil, assumes that it's converting it from the Windows coordinates. So it's going to convert it from the Windows coordinates into our coordinates, which is us being the drawing view. So we get that point, and the only problem with what we're doing here is that it's going to add this circle where we click, but it's going to make that the origin of the circle view. And I actually want this to be the center of the circle view, so I'm just going to kind of hack together a way that we could put this in the center. Realistically, if I was making a real application, I would make probably an extension on NSView to have a center property, but I don't really want to go through that because, again, this tutorial is not about that. It's about the NSUndoManager, which I want to get to. All right, let's go ahead and test out what we have here just to make sure that this is good enough. So we have our window, we can add circles, great. That's what we wanted, and they appear in the center of where I click. All right, now the remove circle part is a little bit more complicated, but not that much so. So what I'm checking here is the modifier flags to see if I'm holding down the Option key or the Alt key. And if you don't remember bitwise operators, you can check back. I think we talked about this in the drag and drop tutorials that I did. It was a while back ago in Cocoa stuff, but I know we talked about and the or bitwise operators. That's essentially what I'm doing here. So yeah, I'm not going to dive into that much more. What we want to do though is if we are holding down the Option key and I click somewhere on the view, I want to see if I can pick the view that I have selected. So I want to say if let view gets, and we can use the method called hitTest, and hitTest will return a NSView of whatever we've selected. So I'm going to pass in the point that we click, and basically based on the point that I click, whatever the furthest subview is that the hitTest detects, then I'm going to get back that view. All right, so if there's a view at this hitTest, whatever that lowest view is, that's what we get back, or the furthest one on as a subview. The last thing I want to check though is if the view is actually a circle view. So if the view is actually a circle view, that we only want to remove circle views, so that's why we're doing that check. And then assuming all that works out, we will remove the circle. All right, so grandiose. We're done, and yeah, we can go ahead and try this out. So let's run this code. Obviously, we don't have anything to do with the NSUndoManager yet, but we'll try that out in just a second. So if I hold down the Option key and I clicky, you'll see that we now remove stuff. So that's great. We are a functioning remover of circles. All right, so now how do I incorporate the NSUndoManager? Well, the NSUndoManager, we can ask for that from the NS view by simply asking for the UndoManager. So the UndoManager is actually a property on the NSResponder class. NSView is a subclass of NSResponder, and so we can just access the UndoManager property. So we'll say UndoManager. We want to, so for this example, when I'm adding a circle, basically what we're saying here is what operation are we going to do when we add the circle? And the UndoManager is quite simple. The idea is we're going to add on to the UndoManager the exact opposite action that we just performed. So if I add a circle, I should tell the UndoManager perform the remove circle command, right? If I'm going to undo this. So quite simply, the target is the thing that we're sending the action to. The selector is going to be the method that we call. In this case, we're going to call remove circle. And we put a colon at the end because there's a parameter. And the parameter that we pass in is this object, and the object is going to be the circle, right? So if I add a circle to my drawing view, we add it to the sub view, then I tell the UndoManager, all right, if anybody ever wants to undo this operation, you're going to call remove circle with this circle object, right? Quite simply, it's the reverse of what we just did. Another option for this is calling another method on the UndoManager called prepare with invocation target. And the target is ourself. That's who is going to be sent this action. And the interesting thing about this is that this uses the NS invocation class of Objective-C, or I think it's from Foundation, not 100% sure on that, but the NS invocation objects allow you to basically freeze dry an action that would be performed, and then you can basically sort of save that as an object. So it basically saves an action that could be performed, and then you can just invoke it later, right? So what's really cool about this is we're basically going to say invoke this thing on ourself, and what we're going to invoke is dot add circle, and we're going to call circle, right? So this might look kind of weird. You're like, that's interesting. I'm not sure what this is really doing, but basically this is saying we're going to take this add circle, this method that we have add circle here, and we're going to perform it on this object at some given point whenever we actually execute it, right? So this is actually a very powerful way to represent this, because the problem with this option up here is it works well for simple cases like this, but what if you had parameters that weren't objects, right? They're maybe ints or doubles. Another case is where you have multiple parameters. You can only pass in one object to this function, or this method rather, and so you might need a more complex solution, and this is a more complex solution. You can pass in as many arguments as your methods take, and they don't have to be objects. So this is a much more powerful option if you need a more powerful option. So prepare with invocation target, self, and then add circle. And basically what this is doing is it's going to take this, it's going to freeze dry it, save it for later. If we ever happen to undo this action, it's going to call this add circle method on ourself. And that's as simple as it is, right? So for removing the circle, the opposite of that is adding the circle back in. Pretty simple. All right, now we can go ahead and run this. Yeah, that's actually all you had to do. So we can add some circles, and we can remove some circles, and we can also undo these actions. So in the edit menu now, you'll see that we have the undo option. We can undo that again, and we can undo, right? I can also use Command Z to do that, Command Shift Z to redo, and it works just as expected. Now the only problem with that example was that we don't have any context of what we're undoing or redoing. And when you might be thinking, like, usually you can rename, right? In this case, in Xcode, we have undo typing. So if we want to give some more clarification on what we're actually doing for the action, we can tell the undo manager the action that we're performing. So set action name and the action that we then perform. In the case that we remove a circle, we simply say remove circle. In the case that we are adding a circle, we will say add circle. All right, and we can run this, and let's test it out. So if I click, and I option, you'll see that now I have the option to undo the remove circle. So I undo removing the circle. I can also undo adding a circle. I can undo adding a circle, redo adding a circle, redo adding a circle, redo removing the circle, right? And you can see that it removes it. So the action names we specify when we actually perform the action as the user. And once we've set that, the undo manager will remember these actions as it undoes and redoes them. So as it undoes an action, it'll throw that off the undo stack and it'll put it onto the redo stack. And life is good that way. So we only have to set the action when we actually perform it as the user. It's important not to reset this action. So you'll notice that I did not set, we didn't make these calls inside this function. And the reason for this is because imagine a case where we do a bunch of things and then I undo, and the undo, remember, is calling the add circle, right? So if I then specify in these functions or something that I'm going to, I say remove circle or something like that inside of it, then it's going to screw up your naming on the manager. And you can easily test this out. If you throw in these actions for the undo manager, if I copy this and put it into the add circle right under this, you'll see that the actions that you have for your undo manager actually end up getting screwed up if you start undoing and redoing actions. So feel free to test that out. It's kind of hard to explain why that gets messed up. It makes sense, but it's easier to just explore it yourself, to be honest, and you'll see why putting the actions within these methods will actually screw up the naming of what's in the undo and redo options. But anyway, that's pretty much all you have to know for the NSUndoManager. So when you're working with the undo manager, stick to functions that are very basic to the object that you're changing. So if you're going to perform an action, you might have an array of objects. You might remove specific objects from that array. So your undo manager might be, remove these objects at these indexes or something like that. And you could save that with an NS invocation, such as the one that we did down here. And it's very important that you're only operating on the object that you're changing. So make simple functions that are going to only affect really that specific object, and they are not doing other things. So you don't want to reset the action names or anything like that. Just make sure that you're being specific to the object that you're changing. And there's some more information about that in the documentation for NSUndoManager as well. But anyway, that pretty much covers that. Just some of the details that you might want to know. Like I was saying before, the undo manager is part of the NS responder object. And the reason for that is because every NS view does not have its own undo manager. What it ends up doing is it will go up the responder chain to find the NS undo manager that should basically take care of this action. So in the case that we're in our drawing view, it'll say, all right, drawing view, do you have the undo manager? No. So it'll keep going up the responder chain. It'll go to its super view. Eventually it'll get to the window. In the case that we just have the simple Cocoa app, the window will check a delegate method. I think there's a delegate method that can also return its own NS undo manager. If there's nothing there, the window will actually create its own NS undo manager, and that's the one that you'll use for the rest of the app. The nice thing about this approach is that if we have other views that also have their own undo actions, they will also go up the responder chain and they will hit that same undo manager that the window is currently managing. So all of your undo stuff goes to the same undo manager. It's actually quite elegant. The last thing with that is if you're using a document-based app, the undo manager is managed by your document. So I believe the NS document has a property for the undo manager. So that's the person that manages that particular undo manager. And also, I think there's some things with core data as well that it has its own, it changes the undo manager with core data objects as well. But anyway, that's the gist of that. There's also some other cool features about the undo manager. You can limit the number of undo operations. By default, it's unlimited, but you might not always want that. You can also group particular things. You can disable actions to occur. Maybe you made a lot of small changes along the way, but you really only cared about the big change that you make. So in that case, you might want to disable the undo actions instead of adding on these small little incremental changes. So there's a bunch of things that you can do with the NSUndoManager, and if you're looking for some more things, again, check out the documentation for that. But anyway, if you have any other questions, feel free to leave your questions in the comments section below. More tutorials are, of course, always on the way, and I hope you enjoy your new year. All right, see you next time.